Welcome to today's event. My name is Montasser Kamal, and I'm the program leader for Health Research Partnerships and the International Development Research Center, which houses the Center of Excellence for Civil Registration and Vital Statistics Systems. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. But before I go into my very brief introduction, I would like to give you some housekeeping rules so to make the webinar run smoothly for everyone. And I'm sure by now you're all accustomed to this, being on online events. Today's event will be recorded and will be made available on the Center of Excellence website shortly after the webinar. So please let us know if you have any concern with that. You can listen to the event in English, French, and Arabic or Arabic. Select the language of your choice in the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a globe where you can click on and select your preferred language. There will be an opportunity to ask questions to the panelists, so please send those in the language of your choice, English, French, or Arabic, in the Q&A section of this webinar. Please keep your questions short and specific so our speakers can answer as many of them as possible for the benefit of everyone. Today, we're proud to launch a new publication, the Compendium of Good Practices, Harnessing Civil Registration and Vital Statistics in Conflict, Emergencies and Fragile Settings, by the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems and our friends and partners at Open Data Watch. The Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems is a Canadian initiative created with funding from Global Affairs Canada and the International Development Research Center in late 2015. Open Data Watch is an international nonprofit organization working at the intersection of open data and official statistics. Together, we have joined forces once more to document and research into a topic that captures the news relentlessly for the last many months, emergencies, but also conflict and fragile settings. It's hard to think of any other time in history where civil registration and vital statistics was more urgent and more important than the times we're living in now. All efforts to know how many people need to be vaccinated, how many vaccines need to be made available, by when, what age population the vaccines, for example, are relevant for and should be available for. These are all things that create this opportunity for us to really rebuild systems, including CRVS systems, to rebuild them stronger and more comprehensive and more universal and rigorous. And these are some of the issues we will be delving into today with our distinguished panelists. A group of distinguished authors have authored a set of 12 papers which we published and launched here today in what we believe is a solid contribution to the discussion around how CRVS systems can effectively support interventions in these settings, and how we can harness the power of data for improving human lives and good governance. Data is no longer a dry subject or an abstract concept. Data is fundamental. CRVS and systems and data systems are fundamental for achieving human rights and for making sure that no one is left behind. And today's panelists will emphasize these points in their presentations. Without further ado, I'm giving the floor to IDRC's Regional Director for Middle East and North Africa, Ms. Barbara Shinstone, for her opening remarks. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Montasser. It is indeed a great pleasure and an honor to be with you today for the launch of this new compendium. A warm welcome to all of you joining us from across the region of MENA, as well as from different corners of the globe. I don't want to take up the time of our expert speakers, so I will not dwell on the obvious importance of CRVS, fundamental even in so-called normal times, to the ability of governments to provide for the well-being of their people, and critical also for the rights and protection of individuals. Today, the pandemic has brought home to us both the interconnectedness and fragility of the world we live in. It is timely then to look at CRVS in the special context of emergencies, whether natural disaster, conflict and war, pandemic, forced displacement, or other crisis. The impact of these situations can undermine the best of CRVS systems and also set back underdeveloped ones. Yet these systems, as we will hear today, are critical to individuals and governments if they are to manage and recover from the precarious and difficult situations emergencies bring upon them. My organization, IDRC, takes a special interest in CRVS as part of the Center for Excellence that Montasser has described to you. Its purpose is to help CRVS processes in more than 20 countries, recognizing that without good data about births, deaths, and other key milestones of life, and without the basic protection of individuals that registration of these events can bring, it will be very difficult to reach the Millennium Development Goals by 2030. It is an honor to work in this endeavor with governments, civil society, and multilateral organizations, in particular with partners such as UNFPA, the UN Statistics Office, the Open Data Foundation, NRC, UNESCO, World Health Organization, OECD, UNICEF, among others. There's really no need for me to say more at this time. I would like now to introduce Her Excellency, Ms. Donica Pottie, Canada's ambassador to Jordan. Her distinguished profile is described in the backgrounder to this event. In her diplomatic work supporting rights, gender empowerment, and social and economic development across the globe, Ms. Pottie has also been an unfailing supporter of IDRC and to the cause of CRVS. Many thanks, Donica, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara, for the introduction and for inviting me today. I'm going to pivot to a different region of the world. So many years ago, I served in Cambodia, about 30 years after the destruction of their records by the genocidal civil war. It took that long and some urging from the UN system before Cambodia began to reconstruct a CRVS system. I returned to Cambodia a decade later and found quite a changed environment. That data was being used to inform programs in education, health, family planning, and in other areas. And this was critically important to Cambodia's efforts to meet the Millennium and now the Sustainable Development Goals. So what did I take away from this? Firstly, that CRVS is critically important, but often overlooked as an area in post-conflict peace building. This is something we should bear in mind in this region as we hope there'll be peace in some of the conflicts that we see around us. Secondly, what sounds at first as if it's something that can wait until later really can't, because it provides a significant source of data and evidence. Without that evidence, governments are hampered in efforts to put in place the policies and programs that really reach their citizens. And as someone's already said, that ensures we leave no one behind. Lastly, as already mentioned, it supports and protects individual human rights. Being counted is profound. It says that you matter, and that's, of course, an important individual human right. And when our important life events are registered, it also makes it more likely that we can feel that our voice is heard and access important public services like education, medical care, and of course, the right to vote. With over 250 million people on the move, many are born in situations that are difficult. They get married, they divorce, they die. And the nut we have to crack is, in such challenging environments, how can we ensure civil registration and identification? When that doesn't happen, the consequences can be far-reaching and even intergenerational, and we see this with the Palestinians in our region. Even in less drastic circumstances, we need a way forward to ensure that there is resilience in the records themselves and that they're not susceptible to being obliterated by natural disasters. And as others have already mentioned, the COVID pandemic also underscores the importance of this area. I'll highlight the fact that we're seeing daily numbers being reported of cases and deaths, but it will only be when we can assess death registration and compare that with previous years that we'll really get a true accounting of the cost of the pandemic. The Middle East is experiencing all of the challenges that have been mentioned: war, conflict, fragility, pandemic, displacements, and refugee movements. They're not only complex in this region, but they're surely to scale. We see unprecedented numbers of refugees and displaced persons, and some, like the Palestinians, displaced or in that situation for generations. Entire population groups lack legal identity, with more than 5 million Syrian refugees and many thousands in Yemen internally displaced. And the fact that the fragility in Iraq has many Iraqis still abroad, this indicates the level and the scale of the issue here. How are these people being counted? How are they being guaranteed identity and access to services? How are we ensuring they're not left behind? The Compendium on Harnessing CRVS in Conflict, Emergencies and Fragile Settings is a first of its kind and certainly very relevant to this region. And I hope it will pave the way to strengthen systems and to crack these problems of how we can do better. Canada is pleased to support the Centre of Excellence for CRVS Systems based in IDRC. And we're very proud to see the result, or this part of the result of that work. We believe that data and CRVS as a key source of data is critically important for sustainable development, including for areas of priority for Canada in this region, notably inequality of women and girls, education, including for refugee children, and support for humanitarian assistance that meets the most vulnerable. CRVS is part and parcel of reaching all SDGs, but most notably, it is clearly presaged in SDG 17 on strengthening the means of implementation. I really am looking forward to hearing from the panelists and to learning from them. And thank you so much for the invitation to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Pottie, for these remarks, and especially about your experience from Cambodia and the examples you gave from the Middle East region, and also showing Canada's perspective on today's important topic and emphasizing, especially you're emphasizing the urgency of this work. So thank you so much for setting the stage for this important webinar. Now, my colleagues Shaida Badia and Irina Dinku will introduce the work and content of our new compendium. Shaida, to many of you, is no stranger. She's Mama Data. She's a friend. She's a colleague. She's a mentor, and she's a leader to many of us and to all of us, if I would say. She's Open Data Watch's executive director and a fierce advocate for CRVS in each and every forum. Irina Dinku is another fierce advocate of CRVS. She's our senior program specialist at the Center of Excellence, and she has initiated and shaped the work on the compendium. Shaida, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Montasser, and delighted to be here at this launch with very special thanks to you and to the Center of Excellence and IDRC for this opportunity to partner with you. I usually talk a lot at webinars, and particularly webinars with my favorite topic like CRVS, but today I would be extremely brief because we have a number of excellent panelists that we want to hear from. I just wanted to say that this work that we are presenting today started at the beginning of the pandemic. So we have done a lot of the work during the lockdown. The aim has been to produce a series of good practices for this field in CRVS systems in conflict, emergency, and fragile contexts, and to bring out the knowledge, not only documentation of the knowledge, but also to communicate it. And today's event is very important, and we look forward to support from all the partners to actually to extend this information and to share it more widely. As you have said, Montasser, we have the work of the 12 papers, which has been commissioned by a range of experts from civil registrars themselves, practitioners, and researchers. And the topics are very varied, and Irina will give us an overview of this. I just wanted to say that this work, when we started, is really a work that is very novel. It hasn't been, this field hasn't been really researched as much as it deserves. And this work, we hope, would be filling that knowledge void. And the topic, it's something that needs to be researched even more. The motivation that we had behind this work, if I may, for just a second, was 2 other conferences that we organized together with the Center of Excellence for CRVS at IDRC, both in 2018, February, and 2020. And we were very impressed with the number of experts and number of practitioners that have come together. And 2 subjects were identified as areas where needed more work. One was CRVS, looking through CRVS with a gender lens, and one for CRVS in fragile conditions. And this is what we have done. We tried to have 2 sets of compendiums to fill this knowledge gap. But of course, as we all know, there's so much more needed, both in research, but more importantly, in capacity building in low-income countries and fragile states in particular. This is the field that countries really need, not only knowledge and information research, but technical assistance and financial support. And this is a role that I personally hope that Center of Excellence will continue to work and partner with so many of the amazing organizations that we have today here on our panel. So I will now pass it to my colleague and really good friend, Irina, who has been a huge motivation behind this work. Over to you, dear Irina.
Thank you so much, Saida, and thank you, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, colleagues and friends, wherever you are. It gives me a great pleasure to be with you today and actually speak about something that is near and dear to my heart, civil registration and vital statistic systems, and how they can best support recovery and good governance and emergency response. Now, we have started to see how critical the CRVS systems are in emergencies, even in high-income countries with the COVID-19 pandemic, because they have proved to be an important tool to measure the real toll of the disease. And as the data from those systems started to fall, with few weeks after the beginning of the pandemic, the mortality picture changed, in most cases for the worst. Now, to support countries and stakeholders, together with our partners and friends from Open Data Watch and 2 very energetic advisors, we have worked around 3 major areas: frameworks and standards for CRVS systems in emergency settings, CRVS and COVID-19, and registration of vital events such as marriages and deaths, and the impacts that they can have on generations and on the systems. Now, what the compendium proposes? It proposes a framework for resilient civil registration systems, which we believe should have 7 major competencies. They should be integrated, responsive, agile, efficient, inclusive, essential, and robust. Now, these frameworks that we propose aims to provide common ground for CRVS practitioners and implementers to create the foundations of resilient civil registration systems. Practices into the compendium also look at the critical international standards that need to be applied in emergencies so that the systems function, they deliver, and they support emergency response, recovery, and sustainable rebuilding. Population protection and data reliability, they remain critical function of the systems, even more important in crisis than in normal times. And we also have an assessment of capacity and financing and barriers to registration in fragility present in the compendium. The compendium also look at key gaps in the international response to the recording and registration of deaths. It discusses how capturing information on deaths, and providing surviving family members with information and death certificates can support institutional and social resilience, how they can contribute to post-crisis recovery, how they pave the way for stability in the post-disaster and the post-conflict future. Now, talking about registration of deaths, we also have a very interesting paper from Brazil, which looks at the registration of no-name deaths and the burial of the people in Rio de Janeiro, a phenomenon that is recurrent in other cities and megapolis in the world. And faithful to our focus on gender, we do have a paper on the experiences of women in 2 countries that have been ravaged by protracted conflict in recent times, Syria and Iraq. And I believe with one of our distinguished panelists, we're going to go further into this. But just to give you a flavor, women are especially impacted because they have lost spouses during the fighting. This results into family and income support and can have an intergenerational cost for both women and the children issued from marriages who are often undocumented. The compendium also documents practices from the recent pandemic. Now, we couldn't miss this opportunity. And distinguished colleagues and friends have documented practices from South Korea, from Ecuador, from New Zealand in relationship with CV registration system. I invite you to read how South Korea calculated CV registration excess deaths, what New Zealand did to continue the show, so to continue registration during lockdown and the pandemic, and how Ecuador dealt with CV registration in crisis. We also are looking at situations where systems are not fully functional, such as in Brazil, where even with significant improvements in the collection and the accuracy of death information over the last almost half of a century, it's still necessary to develop research that presents evidence on which strategies work best for collecting civil records and statistics, and in which context. Last but not least, we all witnessed climate change. And perhaps the paper from Vanuatu in the Pacific would inspire you how to deal and prepare CV registration systems for climate change. With this, I hope I have given you a flavor of the compendium. And just to tell you and reiterate what Shaida and Montasser were saying, we are at a very, very incipient stage of documentation and research, just to ignite discussion around such important and necessary topics and to provoke stakeholders to think outside the box in order to protect systems and, most importantly, people in conflict, in emergency and fragility settings. And I hope that you will find as much pleasure in reading the compendium as we did in preparing it for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shaida and Irina. And I believe now we have a very short video to show you.
The COVID-19 pandemic is taking its toll on everyone. Crises affect people just like you all around the world, whether they are diseases, natural disasters, or conflict and displacement. Samira and her mum were forced out of their homes in Iraq and now live in a refugee camp. Samira's mum lost her documents fleeing the conflict, and so Samira could not receive a birth certificate. As a result, she is excluded from support systems and cannot go to school. In 2020, Cyclone Harold destroyed John's home and all of his identity documents, just like a third of Vanuatu's population. With his documents lost and the government recovering after this cataclysm, he cannot get any help. Anna, just like millions of other Brazilians, has come down with COVID-19. Delays in mortality registration and underreporting of deaths hinders the effective distribution of medical resources. Anna cannot get medical support when she most needs it. However, with robust CRVS systems, things could have been different. CRVS, Civil Registration and Vital Statistics, systems track births, marriages, and deaths. They help safeguard the basic rights of every individual and support people during conflicts and emergencies. They also help decision makers understand the scale of a crisis and accurately plan services. With resilient CRVS systems, Samira, her mother, John, and Anna could get much needed help. More information about how to strengthen CRVS systems in conflicts, emergencies, and fragile settings can be found in the CRVS Compendium of Good Practices. Launched by the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems at the International Development Research Center in partnership with Open Data Watch, this compendium shares new research on a wide range of critical topics, related to CRVS in the context of conflicts, emergencies, and fragile settings. For Samira and her mother, John and Anna. For all of us.
Thank you so much for this, and I'm really glad it worked to help, the video worked to help really set the stage also for our distinguished panelists. The points raised about the relevance of data and actually the difference it makes in everyday's life for people, especially during times of conflict and emergencies, are really could not be emphasized further. So without further ado, I hope these few minutes have given you the glimpse of these challenges people and systems face in conflict and emergencies, a challenge that many of you know well from your own work. We are fortunate to have with us today colleagues that have worked in the field and who documented practices in the field, as well as colleagues who are sitting at the policy level, many of whom are friends of IDRC and the Center of Excellence, and we're delighted to have them with us today. First, we have Dr. Samira Asma, who is the Assistant Director General for the Data Analytics and Delivery for Impact Division with the World Health Organization. Dr. Asma rejoined WHO in 2018 as the Director for Health Metrics and Measurement and led an organization-wide and multi-partner engagement to develop the 13th General Program of Work, the WHO Impact Framework, and the SDG Global Action Plan milestones with UN partners. We also have Ms. Francesca Perucci, who is the Assistant Director in the UN Statistics Division, where she oversees the work of the Statistics Division on SDGs. Between 2002 and 2012, she was responsible for the program on the global monitoring of the MDGs, and for a number of years, she also managed the capacity development program of the Statistics Division to strengthen statistical systems in countries with a focus on statistics and indicators to monitor development on, and the MDGs. We also have Ms. Ada McDonnell, who is a Senior Policy Analyst at the OECD's Development Cooperation Directorate. She's the team lead for the Annual Development Cooperation Report, as well as the new Data for Development project with the members of the OECD Development Assistance Committee. Last but not least, Mr. Martin Clutterbuck, who is the Regional Advisor for the Norwegian Refugee Council's Information, Counseling, and Legal Assistance Program in the Middle East. He has worked on legal aid and rule of law projects in Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Palestine, Syria, and Syria. Martin was the head of office of the Kosovo Property Claims Commission and the UN peacekeeping missions in Kosovo and East Timor. He's a lawyer who has managed a number of community legal aid centers in Australia, specializing in refugee and human rights law. He also authored one of the papers on the Compendium documenting women's experiences in Syria and Iraq that Irina referenced earlier. So the format is going to be that I'll be posing questions to each of the panelists. They are going to have, they're going to respond to these questions, and then we will be opening the floor for questions and answers, questions from the audience and answers from the panelists. Let's go first to Francesca. Francesca, are you on camera? Good morning.
Yes, I'm on camera. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Very nice to have you with us today, and really a pleasure to always be collaborating with you. We know you are an advocate, a very strong advocate for CRVS, and we would like to learn what are some of the latest global plans, priority actions, and initiatives led by the UN and the Statistics Commission that could help with the needed improvements in the CRVS status in fragile and emergency settings. And while you're at it, what are your views on how we could raise the profile and financial support, further financial support for this field of work among stakeholders that you work closely with?
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much to our dear colleagues at the IDRC and the Center of Excellence and the ODW colleagues for inviting me to be part of this event today. I congratulate you all on the release of this excellent report, which really highlights the critical value of CRVS data in these situations of crisis, which are now more evident than ever before. Disaster risk is increasing, and as is disaster loss, and refugees were at the highest absolute number last year at 24 million. And now, of course, the crisis caused by COVID-19 has disrupted in many countries CRVS systems at the time when those systems are more needed than ever to provide key data. So the report is very timely and relevant. Big congratulations to all those who have contributed. In all crises, CRVS systems that are essential to inform responses are often in jeopardy, and crises often just exacerbate the gaps that already exist in poorly developed systems. So it is critical that CRVS be prioritized in national disaster risk reduction plans as part of the foundation of agile and resilient data and statistical systems. And we're now actually working together with the colleagues who prepared the report on disaster risk reduction and trying to highlight the importance of making data and statistical systems, resilient data and statistical systems, a critical part of those reduction plans. Yet when the pandemic hit last year, a survey by UNSD at the beginning in April-May 2020 revealed that 30% of countries did not consider CV registration as an essential service. So that's very worrisome. But the crisis has brought to the forefront the importance of resilient data. Several rounds of surveys last year by the World Bank and our statistics division in the UN that was launched in May 2020 revealed the enormous impact of the pandemic to statistical operations in countries around the world. And no countries were spared as offices were closing and data collection programs were seriously disrupted. Still in October 2020, 23% of NSOs, of National Statistical Offices, were still closed or allowing only essential staff, and 74% had partly or fully halted face-to-face data collection. So what have we learned from the National Statistical System's response to this crisis? Countries that could rely on CV registration and vital statistics and other administrative data sources in general have been better placed to respond to data demands posed by the pandemic, both to monitor and to mitigate the impact. So very, very important lesson there, that when face-to-face data collection is disrupted, strong national statistical systems can rely on other sources of data, and CRVS are fundamentally important. So why aren't CRVS prioritized by governments? And how do we get the necessary political support and the proper investments? How do we raise the profile of CRVS? I think there are important positive signs. National statistical offices are increasingly playing a coordinating role within the system, and they're better placed in the overall new and broader data ecosystem. We see that, for instance, reflected in the very intense new discussion within the UN Statistical Commission and more broadly in the data community on data stewardship. So the importance of having better coordination. That will help, for instance, bring closer together the health information systems and the data statistical systems, building capacity in all parts of the global, of the overall national data system. There has been an overall increase in the use of administrative data sources because we have new data interoperability guidelines and tools that allow us to integrate data sources. We have new technology, and we can link and integrate data sources with unique identifiers, linking the different administrative registers with CV registration at the center. So those are very important developments. Last year, the United Nations Statistics Division and the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Report for the Sustainable Development Data launched a new collaborative on administrative data sources. And we've seen great interest and great participation from countries, sharing their experiences, sharing their knowledge, and great collaboration between developed countries, countries with more advanced registers and civil registration systems, and countries in the South. And overall, there's a much wider recognition of the importance of data and integrating different data sources to inform the implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda and to fulfill the ambition of the agenda of leaving no one behind. A big recognition of the importance of the granularity of data and of leveraging these data sources. At the global level, last year in March 2020, the UN Legal Identity Agenda was adopted by the Statistical Commission and later by the Economic and Social Council in June 2020. This is a holistic approach to civil registration, vital statistics, and identity management, with CRVS being a crucial component. All member states are called upon to implement it as a matter of priority. So a very important step taken by the global statistical community. And the agenda aims at ensuring universal registration of all vital events, translated into generating comprehensive and regular vital statistics and legal identity from all, from birth to death, and with the target deadline of 2030. And finally, we see different data communities increasingly coming together with new and more effective data solutions, leveraging new technologies, innovation. And we see that with the large data community that comes together at the UN World Data Forum, that has grown tremendously. In October last year, we had over 13,000 participants registered to the virtual event. That shows us the great interest and the great level of collaboration. So quite a lot is going on. We need to build on this momentum and on the important lessons that we learned over this past year of crisis from the many important initiatives by countries in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and what the global community has done. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Francesca. I know I would love to unpack a bit more what the information you shared with us, but we also have other panelists, so maybe we can come back to that in the question and answer segment. Thank you so much. Now we turn to Dr. Samira. Thank you also so much for being with us here today. Especially, I know you are launching your own report today as well. So this is really just very kind of you to be with us here today. We are witnessing an increased participation and activity in the field of CRVS at WHO, which is great. And all partners, I believe, are excited and looking forward to WHO becoming more active and stronger in this field. So we're really glad to have you here to speak with us today on how will WHO roll out its new CRVS strategy and build capacity in fragile countries and emergencies in particular. And would the case studies compiled here and presented today in the compendium contribute to capacity building and new innovations in key regions such as the Middle East, North Africa?
Thank you very much for having WHO on this distinguished panel, and congratulations on the launch of a very important compendium for important settings. To begin with, WHO prioritized both CRVS and direct technical assistance to populations experiencing conflict, emergency, or living in fragile settings. And this compendium comes at a very right time. The Compendium of Good Practices and papers are indeed very valuable for all of us. Many of these countries not only face political crisis, but also the onslaught of the pandemic that is causing a tragic impact, particularly for groups that are already facing extreme challenges. These conditions are already difficult. What is even more difficult is to generate timely, reliable, disaggregated, accessible, and most importantly, actionable data to sustain essential services and also inform policy actions. Throughout the pandemic, we have seen daily headlines on lack of accurate number of deaths and causes of deaths. Today, I would like to share with you what WHO is doing in collaboration with partners to strengthen CRVS in response to the request from the member states. And I would like to begin with reminding us of few facts about a fact of life, and that is indeed deaths. As of today, the human toll of the pandemic globally is about 2.9 million. And we know that we do not yet have a confident assessment of the true impact due to lack of CRVS data from many countries or delays in reporting. For example, last week's New York Times article reported deaths in Russia to be, Russian Federation to be 28% higher than officially reported. Second, while today's topic is about CRVS in emergency setting, as Francesca mentioned, we must also recognize that functioning CRVS is truly a litmus test of good governance. 67 of the 320 SDG indicators rely on CRVS systems, and we have already 1 billion people that World Bank designates as the invisible billion are still born without birth certificates, live without registration, and die without death certification. And we don't even know the causes of deaths to undertake and implement true policy actions. Briefly, what WHO practically is doing about it. First, to assess the true impact of COVID-19, WHO, along with my colleague Francesca at UNDESA, have convened a group of global experts to develop a consistent methodology to measuring excess deaths. Given the context and challenges with CRVS data, excess death is one of the most accurate ways to assess the overall toll of the virus. And we hope to have preliminary global estimates by May, and then country-specific estimates by end of this year. And this is going to be truly very important. Member states also requested WHO to provide technical support to strengthen their data and health information system capacity. So in response to that, WHO, along with partners, developed the Score for Health Data Technical Package, which assesses data gaps across 5 key areas. So listen carefully. S, surveys across all the population surveys and risks, including health threats. And C of the score is to count births and deaths and causes of death. Optimizing routine health information systems, reviewing performance and policies, and finally, using or enabling the use of data to drive policy impact. So these are the 5 components of the score. And the score technical package both identifies gaps in countries as well as provide the solutions to precisely address them. So I'll give a quick flavor of what the SCORE global report showed that surveyed, assessed, actually countries assessed, 133 countries assessed their score across these 5 components. And what we found is that 50% of countries register at least 90% of births, and nearly 40% of countries register at least 90% of deaths. So only 20% of countries with cause of death data meet 8% of CRVS standards. And this is quite more challenging in the low and middle income countries, and with significant gaps in the countries that we are speaking today in Africa, Middle Eastern region, and Southeast Asia. The SCORE technical package also have compiled, I just counted, 30 resources on CRVS and causes of death. And we will be delighted and will be adding this compendium and the papers to those resource technical package. The technical package includes a lot of training guidelines, online portals, standards, and tools. The question that comes to my mind is that with all the tools in our hand and knowing now where the gaps are, with the partnership that we are surrounded by, why then are we not making faster progress? I truly believe that the pandemic offers us all a unique opportunity to address this long-standing gap that is widening inequalities. So turning to the WHO's CRVS Strategic Implementation Plan, which we developed in consultation with partners, the primary aim is to empower member states to more effectively and rapidly mobilize partnerships to strengthen CRVS systems and to ensure that it is a part of the routine data systems and the data is used for policy action. There are 4 parts to this strategy. One is to strengthen national and international partner coordination, strengthen causes of death reporting and vital event notification, and integrating it within CRVS systems, building capacity, analytical capacity, and use of mortality and cause of death statistics for policy making, and improving the reporting, dissemination of, and sharing of vital statistics data. We are also in the process of launching a World Health Data Hub that will compile and make available all data on population health, including deaths and causes of death. WHO has been collecting death data since 1950, and we will in few weeks launching that database, which will truly be important resource for the world with all causes by age, and which also includes up till 2019, and we will have further updates soon. The initial focus of the strategy is to roll it out in 40 countries this year, so the ambition is quite ambitious. And this strategy is not only a WHO strategy. As I mentioned, it has been developed in collaboration with all the partners, and we really look forward to working and deepening our collaboration. Countries' case studies are also an extremely important element of WHO's transformation and strategy that Dr. Tedros has been advocating. With countries at the center, we really would like to use these case studies in the compendium that we have across many topical areas, along with the quantitative assessments or measurements. The qualitative country case studies will be extremely important so that we can rapidly scale up best practices. In closing, I would come back to the New York Times article that I mentioned on excess deaths in Russian Federation. And I quote that we are at risk of and shouldn't grow used to living in a state of pandemic, and we shouldn't grow used to the deaths. So with that profound statement, I want to thank you again for this opportunity. And I think we must seize this opportunity together. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more with you on the urgency and the implications of why we need to have comprehensive and rigorous CRVS and data systems and health information systems. And we're really glad to see WHO sort of expanding its work in this area, of course, in collaboration with others, as you mentioned, and hopefully in the Q&A, we'll be able to hear a little bit more about that. Thank you so much. Now we go to Ada. Are you there? If you could put your camera on.
Hello, hello, Montasser. Can you hear me?
Hi. Very nice to see you. Good afternoon, I think, where you are. So OECD is bringing CRVS prominently on its agenda, which is great. So good to have all these discussions at policy level, at the donors table. Considering CRVS systems are foundational to a national statistics system and the measuring and monitoring of the SDGs, and that the field is still so under-resourced and now with COVID-19 prioritized above all else, what efforts are underway to mobilize financial resources for them? We've all heard from the previous speakers and the introductions about the urgency of having these systems built and rebuilt and operating as essential services, but also that many of them lack financial resources and capacity. So what efforts are underway to mobilize financial resources for them?
Thank you very much, Montasser, for inviting me to participate in this panel and to bring what I see as a development cooperation policy perspective and financing perspective from our position here in the OECD, which is probably less embedded for the time being in the statistical community. So good morning, colleagues, good afternoon, and yes, it's a real pleasure to participate. Before I turn to the question, I just want to say that I really welcome this compendium of good practices. I read many of the articles yesterday afternoon and in preparing for this, and really good practice like this really do bring great value. They are an important contribution to make in this case that we really do need to make for investing in CRVS. The examples show why registration, why administrative data are relevant for human empowerment, for development, for governance. And I think those real life experiences really turn something that's quite systemic into something that's real and tangible for development actors, for policymakers. So they hopefully will inspire further action, and I wish you and hope you can continue to build up that evidence base, because Shada did mention that it's kind of under-researched, and so the Centre of Excellence is doing a great job, and we're delighted to collaborate with you. So let me just turn to that question of what efforts are underway to mobilize financial resources for CRVS. From the outset, let me just say, I think this is probably one of the hardest questions you can ask a panelist. And there are many reasons why it's so hard. At the international level, where we operate at the OECD in tracking official development assistance flows according to comparative reporting guidance, etc., to be really honest, we don't know or track carefully enough aid investments in statistics and data and statistical capacity building, or in CRVS for that matter. So there really is a challenge there in the sense that we don't have that overview and rigorous overview of funding. At the same time, I believe that we don't really have a very good overview either of how domestic resources in developing countries are mobilized for CRVS or for national statistical systems. And something that Paris 21, our colleagues upstairs, when we're in our offices here in the OECD have flagged is that the NSDSs themselves don't necessarily have a fully fledged budget for delivery, and budgets for statistics are not necessarily integrated into national development plans and national development budgets. So there is actually this broader context of financing that we don't have a good grasp of. And then in addition, it's very hard then to come up with those costings of how much it takes, what the funding gaps are, and how to design a proper fundraising campaigns for CRVS. So that's a challenge, and really is something that we need to continue to work on. So with that kind of rather, I suppose, negative context around not knowing how much the money is, I would like to share some insights with you today on some new research that we have been doing with members of the Development Assistance Committee who are very active in supporting national statistical systems, in investing in statistical capacity building, but also more broadly on data and statistics. And my first point there is that we really believe, from years of work on evaluating, assessing, reviewing development cooperation more broadly, which we announced yesterday is $161 billion US for 2020. So it is one of the most reliable sources of external financing for development in the world. It is resilient in the face of crisis. We saw that in the 2020 figures for ODA, so that's good. But we do know that the quality of the spend is as important, if not more important, as the quantity. And with that in mind, in 2019, the OECD created a Data for Development group of DAC members to really discuss how to be much more effective with that small pot of resources that are invested in statistical systems, and by looking at the effectiveness, make the case to raise those resources. And so in our work there, we have a fundamental question: who's doing what, where, and why. And we've been developing profiles. Right now we have 14 profiles of DAC members in terms of their strategies and priorities. And I'm going to share 5 insights that are emerging. It's a preview. My colleague Simon Lang is online as well and has been working hard on this, and we hope to publish them in May. But let me give you a sneak preview. So the first insight that we're finding from these 14 profiles that are quite detailed, that we've also developed directly with the countries, is that for the DAC members, the ODA, Official Development of Data and Statistics, it does tend to reflect the overarching themes and geographic priorities of countries. So for example, while the overarching development cooperation policies don't necessarily identify strengthening data and statistical capacity as a core priority, as an overarching priority, we see that the regions that it goes to, or the sectors that aid to data and statistics goes to, reflect very much those priorities. So Australia, for example, it really combines a clear regional focus on the Pacific with support to health and disability data, which are high priorities, health and disability in its strategy. In Canada, which is important, you focus on population and health data to strengthen maternal and child health as part of that feminist development cooperation strategy. So there is a logic and there is a link in terms of how we see the flows. The challenge is that the support that kind of goes to data is not really viewed through a holistic perspective in a strategic way that can really maximize the impact. And also that continuous challenge that investing in systems is really challenging in terms of the visibility of the results that we can show and in the long-term engagement that's required. So, and linked with that is the fact that in a lot of development cooperation agencies, we don't actually have a standalone unit or focal place or anchor for data and statistics, which means it is very hard to knock on a door and who to go to. At the same time, we see an opportunity because there seems to be really a growing appetite for a more strategic approach to data and strengthening data ecosystems. And we see that link very much with that digitalization, because digitalization is a growing priority in development cooperation, and digitalization and data are very strongly connected. A second insight is that DAC members are increasingly investing in data and statistical systems from a thematic and sectoral perspective. And in here, I think this can be really interesting from a CRVS perspective, in the sense that the investments are embedded in large sectoral priorities and programs, and there's a clear trend of more investment in health and economic data, as well as agriculture, gender, and environmental data and statistics. So that's where there seems to be quite a large interest. We're still seeing that the bulk of that support is for censuses and surveys. And so how do we really look at administrative data in those contexts and make the links? Investment in core statistical capacity building does appear to be decreasing. And we see that support to general statistical capacity building declined by more than 20% from our analysis of the data between 2010 and 2019, and stands around 82 million per year in 2019. So the pot of money it's 82 million that we're finding from the bilateral sources. I'm not talking about multilateral organizations, and so it's quite small. It is hard to track CRVS within that. But we are seeing a few countries ahead of the pack, which are Canada, Australia, and Switzerland, but also investing in multilateral mechanisms and funds, which is really important for that coherent systemic approach. At the same time, health data and statistics are increasing, and that has increased significantly from 35 million in 2010 to 73 million in 2019. So here, I think it's really interesting from a CRBS perspective that there is greater investment in aid and in health and data statistics. And if you think about it, we find about $27 billion US is spent in ODA for health systems, right? Of which actually 2/3 of that ODA, overall ODA, comes from the United States to health systems. And half of that is for basic health. So if you're looking at 27 billion, of which half is for basic health and registration and deaths by cause, etc., so closely linked with health, and now we have the pandemic, I think there's an opportunity in making a connection with the health sector colleagues, and WHO have already been speaking about that. And then the last opportunity is gender data. There is definitely an increase, and we're seeing this as a key priority for Australia, Canada, and Sweden, and the United Kingdom, the United States as well. A lot of support for UN Women Count, which is also a good multilateral, a way to take a multilateral approach. Again, for disaggregated data and for women's rights, linking also with marriage registrations, etc. I think it's really important. I'll move quickly on the last, the next few insights, because I want to give time to the conversation. In fragile states, we are seeing that bilateral ODA for data and statistics is increasingly concentrated in fragile states. It's about 46, up from 46% to 69% in 2019. Several countries are representing that shift, but we do see a challenge here in terms from the effectiveness perspective of investment in the fragile situations. We really need to ensure that approaches to statistical capacity building are informed by the context, by multidimensional drivers of fragility and an understanding of the local political economy of governance. And that stems from OECD's extensive work with the International Network on Conflict and Fragility. And here I bring it back to the overall aid flows, because if we're seeing, and I think Lauren and Liliana did this in their good practice piece in the compendium, talk about something like 8 million that we're getting from the press data in fragile states for CRVS. Actually, DAC member countries give about 63% of ODA to fragile contexts, and that was about 60 billion in 2019. So there is really an opportunity to get CRVS on the agenda of the International Network on Conflict and Fragility, and that's something that I can talk about as well with you in terms of how we in the OECD can help make those connections. Another issue is that projects, another insight, are mainly the main delivery modality of ODA to data and statistics. And that really is linked also with the surveys and the censuses. And so administrative data system approaches are harder to finance. And I think we've seen a pullback from general budget support and sectoral budget supports as programmatic ways of funding, which would have been more conducive to systems funding. And we've seen that we can kind of make a link between the change. And then my last point on our last insight is around country ownership. The demand side needs to be really clear for investments and aid investments to work. We've learned that from the profiles, that where technical assistance really responds to the local demand, where it's embedded, where it stays for the long term, and where it really seeks to deliver the needs that the national government and local actors prioritize, it works the best. And so I think that that's really important to think about too, as we go forward. And just in terms of our offer to close, is that we want to raise awareness of civil registration of vital statistics, of investing in statistical systems more broadly. It's not high on the agenda in overall development cooperation policy, unfortunately, even if the narrative is about data-driven development cooperation, data-driven approaches to the SDGs. And I think we're seeing progress because the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, which is a key normative space for ensuring that we deliver on the effectiveness principles, is taking up this issue in the current program. We're working very closely with them to raise that awareness and then to move towards good practices. So I really hope that we can continue to collaborate and bring these examples to this space. There is an appetite, and I think we can see increased resources because of that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ida. This is very rich and very interesting. The numbers indeed do tell a story, which you described very well, very fast. So I think many of us will be reviewing the recording to just make sure that we capture all of this. And also your points about sort of the demand, building the clear demand or having clear demand from the countries is really important, is an important aspect. And there are, of course, capacity implications and capacity gaps there related to that as well. So very important and helpful insights. Thank you so much. Martin, you have been very patient. So thank you for your patience, and good morning to you, good afternoon to you. Can we see you?
I've got the camera on. Can you hear me?
Okay, here you go. Here, yes, we can hear you very well. Martin, you're not only an author of this compendium, but also a practitioner in one of the most difficult, complex parts of the world, where there's conflict, fragility, and displacement, which is the Middle East. From your research, which you captured in the compendium, and your field experience, what do you think are the consequences of the lack of a birth, marriage, and death registration in contexts like Syria and Iraq? Is there an intergenerational cost or implications for women and girls? What is it? And how can we better support countries affected by conflict to strengthen civil registration systems to better protect the most vulnerable, the majority of whom are usually women and children? Your insights, Martin.
Thanks, Montasser, and thanks for the nice, easy questions as well. Certainly, plenty of challenges, extra challenges in terms of war and conflict. But I first wanted to thank again the Centre for Excellence and Open Data Watch for the great research. I really enjoyed reading the papers as well, and I think it's a major contribution. I guess in terms of consequences for civil registration in situations of war, one of the paradoxes is at a time when civil registries are often non-functional, archives are destroyed, people can't access civil registration documents or offices. That's a time when people need the documents often the most. They need them to access humanitarian assistance. They need them to go to school, to access health services, and just for freedom of movement, and to confirm, particularly in situations of conflict, who you are. So they become even more important. And for women, there's another paradox that often women who are widowed or whose husbands are missing or conscripted or whereabouts unknown are often forced forward to take responsibility for ensuring documentation for the family and for the children in situations often where they face obstacles and discrimination in sort of walking into registry offices or to courts to obtain documents, because it's not a role that they're always familiar with as well. So I wanted to, in the short time, give a bit of a field perspective on some of the issues faced, and not just to make a push for registration of the simple cases in terms of conflict, but for the hard cases, the ones that really challenge the system, the ones that where there's sometimes no evidence of certain events that have taken place, but that would have a massive impact on women, particularly, to be able to move forward with the necessary registration and documentation. So civil registrations often work fine during times of peace, but during times of conflict, they are faced with all sorts of unexpected and difficult cases, include missing persons, large numbers of missing persons with a lack of evidence as to where the person is or were last seen, large numbers of deaths, situations of orphans, unaccompanied minors, child marriage, every possible permutation, use of false documentation. So it's a real challenge to the system. And in terms of consequences, maybe just to give two examples, one would be from Iraq, where there's quite a large number of children. We've estimated more than perhaps 80,000 children in Iraq who can't obtain birth certificates, Iraqi birth certificates, because of a security clearance issue for typically the father. So without the birth certificate, without the proof of legal identity, they're really limited in their life opportunities. They're unable to go to school, to access healthcare, to get government subsidies for the public distribution scheme, to move past checkpoints. And more than that, perhaps, they're really excluded from society. You know, they're really on the margins in terms of not being able to prove who you are, not having a legal identity. In Syria, another example, in the non-government controlled areas, women particularly often take the very risky situation of crossing the lines of conflict into government areas to sort of access government documents, which are seen to be very important and valuable as well. So that's at great personal cost to cross those lines. You know, there's protection risks involved. So there's some of the consequences. In terms of the intergenerational impact, I guess, I mean, all wars and conflicts have a massive intergenerational impact. They often set families back by years, by decades. Children miss schooling. You know, in the Syrian civil war, up to 8 years of schooling is compromised for displaced children. Homes are destroyed. You know, you're set back to zero often. You have to start from the beginning. But there's particular intergenerational impacts and consequences for women and girls. And I wanted to just give a couple of examples, perhaps. The first one, which is not just for women, but for anybody, is in a situation where you're unable to prove your parentage, in a situation where, you know, the parentage, particularly the father, is necessary to be able to prove the nationality. So without that sort of proof, you become not only without a legal identity, but stateless. And that's a sort of status that you pass on, a stateless status that you pass on intergenerationally to your children in the future as well. And that's a phenomena in the Middle East, you know, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon as well, where people have been stateless for generations as well, and the children become stateless. The second issue concerns something like child marriage, particularly for girls, where it's also a phenomena in the region, including in Syria. And the rate of child marriage has increased as a result of the conflict, as a sort of a negative coping mechanism as well. So this has massive implications for girls. Obviously, it's a human rights abuse, typically an exploitative situation. There's health consequences for girls. Often, you know, they're forced out of school. There's so many protection issues as well. On top of that, it's a real dilemma for governments as well in terms of registration of marriages. And often there's children of those relationships, and then it's hard to get birth certificates for those children unless the parents are married. And if that's a child marriage, that creates an extra ethical human rights dilemma as well. And the third sort of intergenerational impact can be one for widows in conflict, who face their own trauma with the loss of spouses, or without knowledge of the whereabouts of spouses as well, at the same time that they really need documentation and proof of identity for children of the relationship, and for proof of marriage, often in situations where there was an inability to formally register the marriage, but also for things such as inheritance rights. If you've lost your spousal income, inheritance can be something really important to keep you going. For remarriage in the future, you know, you need certainty, you need to be able to move forwards with your life. And so these are some of the most complicated issues coming up, where the systems really struggle to deal with them. So in terms of the last question, in terms of what can be done, I mean, there's a lot that can be done. And perhaps the first starting point is to have a dialogue with governments as well, and again, reinforce the importance of civil registration of these difficult events in the interest of the government, not just the individuals concerned. Of course, it's of massive benefit to them, but also for the governments, because governments have a strong interest in knowing who's in the country and confirming the identity of everyone there within the jurisdiction, as well as, of course, having the positive obligations pursuant to the human rights treaties that have been signed up to facilitate the registration. A second step would be to depoliticise the issue of civil registration from other issues, whether it's political or criminal or other issues as well. And in the example of Iraq as well, the right of every child, for example, to have a birth certificate and proof of legal identity, regardless of any other criminal or security issues that may be faced by other family members. It's a separate issue. In relation to women particularly, a big step would be to open up a dialogue, at least a difficult dialogue, with governments in the Middle East about nationality deriving maternally or paternally from both sides, not just from the father's side as well, which would make a huge difference to the ability to prove nationality. And following on from that as well, the ability to register children regardless of the marital status of the parents as well. So finally, and to perhaps end on a more positive note, because we are talking about a situation of conflict and war, these situations can also create an opportunity to see people in these difficult traumatic situations as not just a problem, but an opportunity to help them get their situation back on track. For governments to take the initiative to say, right, let's fix this situation and let's be able to move, let's help this person move forwards with their life and create the opportunities that they've missed out on during the times of war. So there's just some thoughts in closing in relation to steps forward. And over to you. Thanks, Montasser.
Thanks so much, Martin. You also, and thank you for all the panelists. You just packed so much information in a short period of time, and we really appreciate that. So we now have time for some question and answers. And we have questions. So I'm just going to go through the questions in the sequence they are raised. And I'll try to see if they're specific for if they are targeted for one of the specific panels. So if you could please put your cameras on as panelists, that would be great. So the first question is, as we approach a post-COVID world, what should be the priorities for improving CRVS systems in emergency contexts to build forward better? So who would like to take this question on? So priorities, what should be the priorities for improving CRVS systems in emergency context to build forward better? Okay, maybe Martin, could I nominate you to start? We're talking about some of the specifics on that specifically in relation, especially to women and girls. Maybe you could give some ideas or thoughts on prioritizing what should be the priorities in emergency contexts.
I mean, I think a big starting point would be to facilitate registration, to make things easier. And that sometimes would involve taking a more flexible approach to evidence. When something can't be conclusively proven, the death of someone or the fact that a marriage took place, then make things easy. Look at alternative ways of proving that event. It could be the testimony of just one person. So I think that would make a big difference as well. That would allow the system to process these cases faster and to do its job better in a way.
Great.
That would be one suggestion.
Thank you very much, Martin. Anyone else would like to add to this from the panel? It's okay. We have other questions, so we'll move. And if you think of other points you'd like to add, you're welcome to add them after that. So the next question is, what is the role of technology in upgrading CRVS systems in fragile contexts, both during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond? Ida, I think you raised the point about the digitization of systems, and I don't know, maybe Samira, maybe this is something also I know the WHO has been working on in terms of health information systems as well. Ida, would you like to say something?
Thank you very much, Montasser. And just one small response or short response to the first question. The colleagues informed me on the fragility side of matters is that actually there's a very high concentration of financing for data and statistics in a very few fragile contexts. So something that we need to think about going forward is how to broaden the allocations to more countries. I think it's something like 5 fragile settings account for the bulk of the investments in data and statistical systems in those settings. So that would be one message about how we can broaden investments from external sources in more fragile settings. On the digitalization, I cannot speak directly to CRVS. I'm not a CRVS expert, but what I can tell you is that we are seeing a growing emphasis on digital transformation and investment in digital transformation in developing countries. And there are some risks and challenges there. There are major data privacy and protection and governance issues, the regulatory frameworks that need to be thought about. And that's a really high priority on the OECD agenda. And we have a recommendation on AI, for example. And right now, my main job is to lead the Development Cooperation Report of the OECD. It's an annual report. And over the coming year, the focus is on digitalization and the role of development cooperation in that regard. And I believe that the digitalization around data issues will be a key topic, and really invite inputs from colleagues who have the experience in CRVS and statistical systems to also feed into that. We would really welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Samira, would you like to add
yes,
to that?
To add on to what Ida is saying, WHO has promoted a resolution, which is the digital health strategy, which was discussed with the member states last year, and now in the operationalizing phase. It has a few components. One is the data governance component, which is extremely important in terms of upholding the privacy and protection of the individual. The World Bank's initiative of digital ID, and many countries have been piloting and scaling it up. So there is work going on with the digital ID system. Under the SDG Global Action Plan, there is a data and digital accelerator that is now focusing on CRVS. I would also like to highlight another approach to using digital technology is a geospatial information or geographic and geospatial information systems. And we have seen during the pandemic using GIS for assessing deaths through the burial ground where deaths are happening and burials outside of the formal settings or facilities. So that is, again, an area that needs to be explored. International classification of diseases, where we determine the causes of death. The ICD-11 is now digital, and we are working with countries and partners to introduce that. And I think once those are these digital platforms are introduced, we will get more timely and reliable data. But there is a digital divide that we recognize, and we will not be getting away anywhere very soon from the paper and pencil. So I think the other part is to make it interoperable. How do we capture the paper, pencil, the records, and digitalize it and work with countries? So streamlining and making those interoperable solutions that are sustainable for member states, rather than a multiple investments or ideas being promoted, which are sometimes not long lasting. So the Health Data Collaborative that WHO is a secretariat of is a group of 60 plus partner organizations, and a CRVS track is being discussed there. The idea is to align partner investments and technical support of two countries so that we are not duplicating, but increasing our efficiency and in support of member states. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Francesca, do you want to add anything to the point about the role of technology?
Yes, thank you. And just 2 words about the first question. I think it's also important to keep in mind that in situation of vulnerable situations in fragile states, the donors and the development partners in general often rush to quick solutions. And we tend to forget how important it is to build the foundation. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. The CRVS has to be seen as part of rebuilding, as part of the whole infrastructure system and the foundation of the data system. On the second question, the UN indeed recommends that the only robust solution is digitizing civil registration and vital statistical systems. So of course, technology is key there. And as Samira has very nicely outlined, you know, how the key role of interoperability and allowing for the different tools that we have today to be interoperable and to be integrated, in particular, linking the civil registration to the other systems, the other data systems in the country, and making that as central, but also using and leveraging the new technology. And as Samira was saying, you know, geospatial information, remote observations, and use of, you know, we've seen that with COVID, use of telephone records, etc., understand how to better mitigate the effect of the pandemic and understand the trends in the pandemic. So yes, technology as central to the implementation of the identity agenda and the civil registration, and to make it part of the overall data system. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have like 3 minutes left, and I want to still squeeze as many questions as possible from our audiences. There is a question to Samira. Where can we find the WHO's action plan on CRVS? Samira?
Sorry. Yes, the WHO, if you could email, I will post the email address. The strategy is getting finalized. We've received input from all the partners, and it will be out in a few weeks' time. Stay tuned. There will be an expert consultation that will happen, and we'll definitely share it with you so we can invite all the participants that took part today.
Great. Thanks so much, and thank you for the quick answer. Okay, the next question is: how can we make the links and influence? How can we make the links and influence donors to get CRVS on the agenda when they are investing in health and gender and other related topics with potential synergies with CRVS? So, how can we influence donors to get CRVS on the agenda, and link when they're investing in other sectors? How can we also make the synergies clear to them for CRVS? This might be actually the last question we can address, and I'll maybe give each one of you 20 seconds, 30 seconds to give your kind of message, a quick message on that to respond to this question. Let's start with Francesca.
Yeah, thank you. I think we need to show the value of CRVS data, the data that we can derive from these systems, and how they are fundamental. Again, when you integrate with other data sources and they're part of the foundation of the data system, and also, as it was very well outlined by Martin and other speakers, how they safeguard the human rights and women's human rights in particular in all contexts. So we need to make an effort to show the value of that and promote this and bring it up, raise the profile, bring it up to the agenda of donors.
Thank you very much. Samira? I think you're on mute.
Partnerships is going to be critical, because this is not a function of one ministry alone. It is the Ministry of Interior, where national statistical organizations are engaged, ministries of justice with the Registrar General, and then the health sector, ministries of health. But I think we need this collaboration, not only at a national level, but similar organizations working collaboratively with a real sharp focus on supporting countries, having a baseline where country is with the score technical assessment and where we would like to be when we repeat that in 2025. We ought to raise the score from low to high. We have just less than 10 years from SDGs. We shouldn't be focusing on fiddling with addressing data gaps for the next 10 years, but rather close the data gaps as soon as possible so that we can really truly invest in rebuilding equitably.
Thanks so much, Samira. Ada? And sorry to be rushing everyone.
No worries. I think there are a couple of points, and I kind of alluded to them, but I went maybe too fast. I really do think that there's a great opportunity through the research and evidence around what works, and that showcases how, with the functioning registration systems, that can really feed into better statistics to avert and manage crises, for example. How can the civil registration and vital kind of performance on that and the completeness of it fit into things like the OECD's fragility framework, which really informs how members then invest and prioritize their support to fragility. So making it real, showing the instrumental and economic value, as Francesca was also saying, of these registration systems and how they can really help that progress towards getting out of fragility and those long-term processes is really, really important. And the second point that I really believe works is the voice of the demand of developing countries for these systems, and that they are part of those formal dialogues that happen between the donors and the Minister of Finance when they go and they discuss the new program of development in a country. That's where we've learned is how priorities are also set. They're not set on the basis of looking at indicators across the world that informs it. It's the dialogue at the national level, and this needs to get onto the leaders, the demand side, and to their agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. They're very important messages. Martin, your final messages on this point?
Just briefly, I guess I think that the COVID pandemic is the best wake-up call for governments and for donors to show the importance of data and civil registration for protecting people at the individual level, the community level, and the national level. And that same approach can be replicated across all sorts of other needs, whether it's housing needs or health needs or every other sort of need as well. So I think that's the strongest advertisement for it.
Thank you so much, Martin. I'm really sorry we cannot take more of the questions. Just respecting the time, we're a little bit over time already, and I just want to respect our panelists' time and audiences. I want to thank you all so much, our panelists, participants, for the very fruitful and passionate discussion. I hope we are all in agreement that this only begins to shed light on a number of challenges present in this field, but also some opportunities that were raised by the panelists, and that how CRVS systems, that the road is clear, but how CRVS systems can be universal, capture all events through life course, and how and why they are critical, and what needs to be done. So I think there is an interest. I think we need to hopefully all together support the will and the know-how to get there.